These are the words of Martin Luther King Jr. He has been called one of the most brilliant and inspiring orators and speechwriters of all time, but at the same time has been distilled down into an inoffensive shadow of himself, cut down to a character that's comfortable for a white liberal audience. Most people know only that he had a dream and that he preached nonviolence. Those who hold this image would not recognize the revolutionary activist that King actually was. The man that we can see in his writings would be considered a radical, critical of capitalism, opposed to the amassing and use of state military power, an organizer of some of the most effective mass demonstrations and labor strikes that this nation has ever seen. He did these things at great personal cost. King commented in 1954 that he had seen many white people who sincerely opposed segregation and discrimination, but who never took a real stand against it. That pattern continues today, with many who oppose systems of racism and will chastise it, but will not take actions to oppose or actually challenge these institutions. Martin Luther King was arrested 29 times in his life. His house in Montgomery was bombed. He was a divisive figure who challenged people to actually pick a side, whether to defend the status quo or to actually do something about it. His actions and the movements he organized and inspired were disruptive and could not be ignored or silenced by the powerful. And they did try many times to ignore or silence him and the many brave souls who joined these movements. King also spoke out against the accumulation of wealth that is very much a part of white capitalism. He was deeply concerned with and opposed to the exploitation of workers, and profoundly supportive of the labor movement and worker unions as a primary challenge against the capitalist class. The gap of wealth he spoke so passionately about and wrote extensively on has gotten exponentially worse since his death. Union powers have been largely gutted through a series of policies and laws starting in the 1970s. We continue to live under rules and systems that reinforce segregation and discrimination long after it was supposedly abolished. We see it in which schools get funded and which do not. We see it in the planning of cities and the gentrification of neighborhoods. We see it in the long scars left by highways. The truth is that we have not achieved King's dream. The fight to achieve that dream is still ongoing and just as relevant today as it was in his lifetime. And it requires being willing to get disruptive, to get loud, to be willing to challenge injustices, not just through words that may be ignored, but through actions that cannot. It's about time that we start actually respecting the orator and speechwriter that was King, by listening to him, by reading his works, and by allowing ourselves to be inspired by what he actually said, and not just by this sanitized version of him.